Go. That's another protest. Okay. All right. Good to see you all. Wanted to share this video since we're talking about Judaism and the Jews. Go back to the other video. This is a video from the Associated Press. You can see here the title: Ultra-Orthodox Jews Protest Opening of Car Park, or parking lot, as we would say in America, on the Jewish Sabbath. See what date this video was uploaded. See, curiosity. Is there a date here? 8 years ago. Okay, so 2009, roughly. Okay. Why did I have you watch that? Well, just to give you some idea of current events and things that might be of importance to Judaism and the practice of the religion. This happened in the state of Israel, which is the Jewish state. And these are, as we'll learn later, these are Orthodox Jews who follow a stricter variety of Judaism. They follow very closely the laws and the traditions and the customs of their religion. They really should not be called ultra-Orthodox. That's considered offensive by their groups, and the associate professor really know better. They should change the style guide. Nevertheless, these guys are out there on the Sabbath protesting the opening of a parking lot. So they're all there to protest, and dressed in traditional garb. What's the protest for? Why should they be annoyed or want to protest the opening of a parking lot on the Sabbath? Well, the Sabbath is a day of rest. Okay? It's a day of no work, and you're not supposed to do things that are considered servile work and stuff like that. Again, what's the problem with a parking lot? Because they're not there. I guess you might have to have someone there taking fees, unless it's a free parking lot. But no, one of the main obvious problems would be that people would be using it to drive their cars into and out of, which is forbidden on the Sabbath, because according to the law of God, you are not allowed to make a fire on the Sabbath. And of course, as you know, with an internal combustion engine, as most cars are, gasoline ignites and it creates an explosion, which causes kinetic energy, which moves the vehicle. Okay, so you are kind of creating fire, kindling fire in the engine. Someone might say, well, just buy a Tesla. Problem solved, right? Ms. Owens? Sorry, I don't have my eyeglasses. No, because electricity could also be seen as a form of fire, and connecting a circuit which will create a current of electricity could also be seen as kindling a fire. So no, you can't you can't flip the switch and turn on your lights on the Sabbath either. Either you have to turn them on the day before the Sabbath, or people put them on timers. But so if you go to Israel, I don't know if anyone's ever traveled to Israel. I've had the opportunity a couple of times, and both times it fizzled out. Hopefully they'll get there one day. But you'll find out on the Sabbath day, sometimes elevators don't run in hotels or buildings because of electricity. So you can't run the elevator. People are not supposed to be driving around in the cars, and so you should not be driving to a parking lot. So this is an offense because it's the Jewish state. It should be following the laws of God according to the views of these very religious people. Interesting, okay? Notice that they have different colored coats on. I mean, they're wearing kind of traditional clothing. They're kind of like the version, I might mention this later when I talk about the Haredim, but they're kind of like the Jewish version of the Amish. They wear clothing from the 1700s and stuff like that as a sign of their distinction. Wear these big fuzzy hats and stuff like that. But notice their coats are different colors, and apparently that shows different religious views. Sometimes you'll see a Jew wearing a long black, even in Israel, wearing these long black coats that have stripes that are gray and have stripes across them. And that means they don't accept the state of Israel, even though they live there. So they don't accept the establishment of the state of Israel. Not all Jews are Zionists, as we'll find out later. Anyway, so they're protesting. You see the guy on the ground who's praying in front of the car, blocking the car. When I saw the guy who crammed himself under the car, I had to laugh. I'm like, I love these people. I know they're rabble-rousers or whatever, but that's, this guy rules his own, he's willing to shove himself under a car so they can't move the car and break the Sabbath, So that's what's going on in the video. In modern times in the state of Israel, good times, interesting times. So let's continue our discussion of the Jews, these people. Where do we cut off? Okay, it was this on the PowerPoint. We're going to do that? Okay. Let's make sure that everybody's here. Ms. Dietrich, are you here? See you, Mr. Rosley. Okay. So I ended by talking about how the United Kingdom of the Israelites was separated into a northern and a southern faction because of the perceived oppression of the north by the south. And as you see in the PowerPoint, that happened in 932 BC. You have the divided kingdom. So you have the north and the south. The southern kingdom is called, this can get a little bit confusing, but just go with it. The southern kingdom comes to be called the kingdom of Judah, and the northern kingdom comes to be called the kingdom of Israel. Okay? So they're still named after Jacob Israel, but Judah is named after the major tribe of Judah, which takes up the bulk of the southern kingdom. The capital of Judah is in Jerusalem, and the capital of Israel is in Samaria. Okay? And the people up here in the kingdom of Israel, they even establish eventually their own temple and places of worship, in contrast to the Jewish temple. So there's a division. In 721 BC, and I should note that the dates vary. I don't know. you read like books by biblical scholars or Old Testament scholars, and they give a little bit different dates. So you just have to choose one and go with it. So these are the dates I'm going with. And the dates might differ by a year or two from the dates even in the textbook. So just go with what I give you on the PowerPoint, because that's what I'm going to ask you about. Because you just have to make a decision, because, you know, dates in the ancient world are not always completely accurate. Nevertheless, sometime around 721 BC, or in 721 BC, the Assyrian Empire from the north, up here, the Assyrians, and we have the modern-day country of Syria, so from that which is north, okay? They come down from the northern part. I wonder if I have a map for that. Better. Give a map. Let me see if I find a better map. Okay, this is probably a better map to use for my point. Up here in this region, you had an empire called the Assyrian Empire, and in 721 BC, they come down and they destroy the northern kingdom of Israel. And they disperse all the Jews, the Israelites who are living in that kingdom, and send them God knows where, who knows where. They disappear into the mists of history. Or do they? Okay? Because we have this group of people who are called the Samaritans. And this destruction of the kingdom of the northern kingdom of Israel is, in case you're curious, you can find it in the Jewish sacred writings in the second book of Kings, chapter 17. So where do these people go? We don't know. However, they might still be around because we have this group of people called the Samaritans. Remember, the capital of the northern kingdom is Samaria. So these people are from Samaria, so they're called Samaritans. Right, from Samaria, capital of Israel, and they claim some lineage possibly to the descendants of the people from this event. According to the Bible, again, this is the only historical record that goes back far enough that we have access to, the Samaritans are descendants of non-Israelites. The Assyrians exiled all the Jews that were there, the Israelites, and then they brought in foreigners to populate the land, their own people. So the Samaritans are actually the non-Israelite colonists sent by the Assyrians to populate the area. According to the biblical story, God does not like this because the foreigners don't know how to worship him properly. They're not doing the right things. They're not giving him the right food that he likes, like goats and lamb. God likes lamb meat and goat meat for some reason. Maybe he's Indian. I don't know. Indian food, yes. Who knows? Anyways, but they're not worshiping him properly. So he starts killing off the foreigners who show up. And so according to the second book of Kings, chapter 17, the emperor of the Assyrians says, well, we got to send one of the Jews back. We'll send one of their priests back who knows how to worship the God of the area properly. And so that God won't be angry with us. And also teach the local people how to observe the laws of this God so it won't be angry with us. Okay? So that, is that where this group comes from? I mean, that might be a very traditional, legendary story, but it's not clear where the Samaritans come from. They might have been there all along. Okay, they might have been people who were just left behind after the exile because they didn't exile everybody. What do the Samaritans say? Well, the Samaritans claim that they're from two of the tribes of one of Israel's sons, and that they come from, or they have the high priesthood that was given to Moses' brother Aaron, this man Aaron. So they go all the way back to Moses in their view. They're not foreigners. And the split with the Jews, the Samaritans, I guess I don't want to say that because that would confuse the issue, but the split between the Samaritans and the Jews comes about because they dispute who should have been the high priest. The Jews followed one candidate for a successor to Aaron the high priest, and the Samaritans followed another one. But there's clearly some connection between these two groups, wherever they came from, and we're not exactly sure where the Samaritans come from, because they're not Jews per se, but they somehow seem related. They're certainly related in belief. The Samaritans worship the one God of Israel. They follow the law of Moses that God gave to Moses. They have the same feasts and festivals as the Jews, like Passover. They have a temple, which they still go to. This is where they're supposedly their temple. They don't have the building anymore, but they go to the mountain on which the building was to worship and to offer sacrifice. They practice circumcision, etc., and so forth. Now that we have the benefit of modern means like genetic studies, we can establish certain things about the Samaritans. Yes, in 2004, according to a genetics study, there does seem to be some sort of genetic connection between the Samaritans and modern Jews. So there is a common ancestry. Okay, obviously it doesn't solve the historical issue of where they come from, how this occurred, but it does show that there is a common ancestry. They are a very, very small group. In fact, they seem to be dying out in my view, because the last number from the last census, or at least the accounting of how many there are, in 2022, there's only 874 Samaritans in the state of Israel. And that's down, actually, from previous numbers that I looked up. When I revised my numbers for the class, for the course, it's only 874. There were more before, but not a lot. Anyways, so the Samaritans, which may come from the northern kingdom. Jewish independence was destroyed with, wait a second. Oh, yeah, okay. Jewish independence eventually was destroyed, and all of the Jews were eventually exiled in this event called the Babylonian exile, because you still had the southern kingdom. You still had the kingdom of Judah, and that continued for a couple centuries after the destruction of the northern kingdom. However, eventually that even gets destroyed. There's another empire called the Babylonians. I apologize for going back, but this is just a better map to show you. Over here in Babylonia, ancient Iraq. So you had a huge empire here that developed, and they came over, and then they destroyed the southern kingdom in 587 BC. So that's another major date in the history of Judaism. Whoops, sorry about that. It's another major date in the history of Judaism. Why did I put that on the PowerPoint? Well, it's there. Anyways, it's there in your dates, 587 to 539, the Babylonian exile. Again, the Babylonians invaded, they destroyed the kingdom, they destroyed the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and they exiled most of the inhabitants of the region to Babylon, to live. Some people were left in Israel, but mostly people were exiled. With this exile, it was impossible to travel to Jerusalem and fulfill the temple requirements. There are many of the laws of the Jews at the time were centered around this place of worship, Mizrezer, and they couldn't fulfill them anymore. They were exiled from their homeland. So many of the religious regulations that they had became a dead letter or were impossible to observe. So there was a religious void. So certain things develop in this time of exile that continue into Judaism to this day. Things like the synagogue, scribes, and the Sanhedrin. What is a synagogue? It comes from two Greek words, sun, which means with or together, and agoge, to come. So a coming together, a place of assembly. And that's exactly what a synagogue is. It's a place of Jewish worship and religious instruction. You come together to worship and to learn. It's a place of assembly and worship, and a place for intensive study and education in the religious laws of the Jews. You need people to interpret. You need interpreters. I mean, you always needed interpreters before this, and you need interpreters in every religion. This is just a sociological reality of any religion we're going to study. You have people who are experts, religious experts, who interpret the laws for people, and these were called scribes, an ancient scholar of Jewish law. And they appear. So they interpret the law, the religious rules for Jews. They are bearers of the tradition and the conduct of how Jews are supposed to live. They might be the first kind of rabbis, but rabbi comes later, but they're kind of like rabbis in that sense, but not completely the same. And you have the development of a council called the Sanhedrin, which again is not a Jewish word. It actually, again, like synagogue, comes from Greek. Sun and Hedra. Hedra is a place to sit. So like a council that sits down and makes judgments. So you have a council that's of elders and religious leaders who decide questions of law and practice for the Jews, because they needed this. They needed, now that we're living hundreds of miles away, the temple is destroyed. What are we supposed to do with all these laws that relate to the temple and Jewish life? You know, we're living in different conditions. We need something to make authoritative decisions. As you can see from the dates, the exile does not last that long. Eventually, the Babylonians themselves are conquered, and the conquerors say, everybody go home. You know, all the conquered peoples of the Babylonians, return to your original home. Which was really quite generous of them to do, these later conquerors. And so the Jews would return home around 539 BC and would hope to rebuild the temple. Yes, I give you that map. I guess I could have used that map. Sorry about that. Forgot I put that map on there. It doesn't matter. So they return to rebuild the temple, and since it's the second temple after Solomon's temple, it's called the Second Temple period, which extends from the 6th century BC all the way to 70 AD, so a little like 500 years. The main figure in this period is a man called Ezra the scribe, who flourished around from 465 to 359 BC. And he is often called the father of Judaism. Who was he? Well, what we know about him is mostly in the Bible. You have two books called Ezra and Nehemiah, the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, which are really one book, but they eventually got divided into two. And these describe Ezra and his activities. And he was a priest. He was also a scribe from Babylon who returns to the desolated former kingdom of Judah to reinstate the observance of the law amongst the people and to help in rebuilding the city of Jerusalem and the temple. According to Jewish tradition, he was the one who founded the great Sanhedrin that I talked about, which would give religious decisions, this council of religious experts who could give legal opinions for Jews living throughout the world. And so Ezra is a major figure, and in Jewish writings, in this one Jewish writing, it says, quote, Ezra was worthy for the Torah to have been given to him had not Moses come before him. This is from a work, Tosefta Sanhedrin. You'll understand learn what the Tosefta is later. But anyways, the section called Sanhedrin. Well, what does that mean? They're basically saying, and another way of putting this is that if Moses had not preceded Ezra, God would have judged him the best man to give his law to. God bless you, to reveal himself to. So it shows you like Ezra is just after the figure Moses in importance. During the time of the Second Temple period, another idea starts to develop within Judaism that comes out of the exile, and that's the idea of a king savior, i.e., AKA, I guess I should say, the Messiah, or the Christ, as Christians would say, but the Messiah. This is a king savior who would defeat the enemies of Israel so that the Jews could live in peace. So they would constantly not... Because, if you look at the map, they're kind of victims of circumstance. They're right here at the crossroads between Africa and Asia. And you had two great kind of imperial powers during different times. You had the Egyptians, who were a great power. It waxed and waned. Sometimes they were great, sometimes they were weak. You had the Assyrians develop here, the Babylonians, the Persians over in Iran, all these empires developing within Mesopotamia, and here are the little old Jews, just sitting there in the middle of it all. So, and this was the way to go. This is all desert. No one's pretty much traveling across this land. It's arid, it's desert. So you follow up the rivers. So everyone's always traveling up the rivers or along the coasts of Saudi Arabia, and they're usually hitting the area where the Israelites were living. So So you have these empires, and they want to go conquer Egypt. Well, they're going to have to go through Israel, and in the process, they conquer Israel. So it's just they're victims of circumstance. They're always getting conquered and battered about by these foreign powers. So the Messiah would free them from that. It would allow the Jews to live in peace. This idea of a Messiah. And yes, we will talk about it more later in the beliefs of Judaism. But what I want to say is that the belief in the Messiah is not clearly described in the Jewish sacred writings, i.e. like we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. The writings of this period state a belief in the coming of a future ruler who would establish a free Jewish nation. Okay, but it's not clearly in their sacred writings. We have other Jewish writings that start to develop, which develop this idea of a future king savior who would reestablish the kingdom of David. And we'll talk about that more later. Another development within Judaism during the Second Temple period is the appearance of this guy, Yeshua, or also known as Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? You may say, well, whoops, what's going on there? Leave me alone. Why is he here? Because Jesus was a Jew. He's part of Judaism. And he's a major Jew. He's probably the best known Jew on the planet, Jesus of Nazareth. You can see his dates there. You don't have to worry about them now for quiz purposes. I will quiz you on them when we talk about Christianity, but, 6 BC to 33 AD. So you might wonder how Jesus was born 6 years before he was born, before Christ. But that's what makes history so fascinating. We'll talk about that later. Jesus is a first century Jew who starts a reform movement within Judaism. He claims possibly to be this Messiah that I just talked about, to be the expected Messiah. But this claim is rejected by the Jewish leadership, and he is executed by another group that, takes over Israel, who are the Romans, the Roman Empire. They take over control of the area. They apparently thought Jesus was making some claim to be the Messiah. Even if he wasn't, it didn't matter. They killed him anyways. So he ends up executed. Yet his movement continues. And obviously we will talk about that movement after Judaism when we talk about Christianity. Due to, this constant desire to be free, and maybe also related to the desire that there would be a Messiah who would come to free them, you have a lot of revolts of the Jews trying to overthrow these conquering powers. And in this case, it's the Romans, as I mentioned. And you have a couple of revolts which are really important to Jewish history. What's called the First Jewish-Roman War, which starts in 66 AD and ends in 73 AD. The Jews had been under Roman occupation since 63 BC. The Romans showed up and took over. And during this time, there was a long period of antagonism between the Romans, who were pagans, followers of a false religion from the point of view of the Jews, but also Jews felt that their religious beliefs were not respected by the Romans. The Romans would antagonize them. And so you have the First Jewish-Roman War develop, also called the Great Revolt, is what it's sometimes called, the Great Revolt. Well, what happens? In 66 AD, the Roman governor of the region sent soldiers into the Jerusalem temple. That was a big no-no. Only Jews could enter the temple. So he desecrates the temple by sending non-Jews into the temple. He also stole money from the temple's treasury. I should say stole, that's too judgmental. He took money from the treasury, which again belonged to God in the eyes of the Jews. So that was another big no-no. And so that comes to a head and leads to this revolt. The upshot is that the Jews lose, and one of the major events of that revolt is that in 70 AD, this major date in Jewish history, the Second Temple is destroyed. The Romans attack Jerusalem. They set the Second Temple. And let me put it this way. The Second Temple is set on fire and burns down and is destroyed. The question is, by whom? Maybe some people say it's the Romans. However, other a Jewish historian from the period says actually what happened is the Jews were setting fires to kind of like get in the way of the Roman soldiers, the army that was moving through the city, and the fires got out of control, and they ended up burning down their own temple in the process. Whoopsie. I mean, it's just, well, what do you... all right. And so the temple was destroyed and has never been rebuilt to this day. Okay, so it still lies in ruins. So that's the end of the Second Temple period. The Romans win this revolt. They put down the revolt, and they actually impose a tax on... this shows how troublesome the Jews were to the Romans, that they imposed a worldwide tax throughout the whole Roman Empire, not just in Palestine where the Jews were. They imposed a tax throughout the whole Roman Empire on Jews that they have to pay. And the revenues of that tax went to the temple to the temple of Jupiter in Rome. So this false god, this head god of all the gods. So another poke in the eye to the Jews, that even the money they had to pay, which was bad enough, is going to the worship of this and the maintenance of this temple to a false god. After this, we have what is called, and I'm combining two periods here. You have what's called the Late Classic period and the Middle Ages. So we got from 70 AD until 1517 AD, so it's quite a long period of time. There was no temple anymore, as with the exile, and the people are in disarray. So what do? They have to kind of bring Jews back together again. What do? So they hold a council in Jamnia, the city called Jamnia, or a town called Jamnia, which I think is in this region of Palestine, and it goes by different names. It goes as Jabne, Yavne. There's all sorts of different spellings of it. I'm going with the traditional spelling, which is Jamnia, but also know that it's sometimes referred to Jabne. And a council is held there, and we have to understand council very loosely. There's a meeting, okay? It probably wasn't anything as formal as an actual council, but it was a meeting, or maybe around 70 AD, but sometime after the destruction of the temple. And Jewish leaders met there, and they were actually allowed by the Romans to meet there to establish a school. And this school is seen as the continuation of the Sanhedrin. And so they met together to consolidate the Jewish religion in the face of the destruction of Jerusalem, of the temple, and just of the whole region in general. And so they set themselves to compiling Jewish laws and giving legal interpretations about how to follow them, much the same thing that was done during the exile in Babylon. It's now just done in a different context. A famous person to remember from this period is this man, Yehuda HaNasi, or translated, it's Judah the Prince, who lived in this late 2nd century AD, so the 180s, the 190s. And he was a considerable scholar, and he is connected with the collection of all the oral tradition of laws into this writing called the Mishnah. The Mishnah, we'll talk about later. I mentioned it now, this thing called the Mishnah, which contained all the oral traditions that the Jews had received, possibly from the time of Ezra the scribe, that had been passed down. So he's known for that, and this kind of fixed the oral tradition into a standard work, so he's famous for that. We also see what seems to be the formal beginnings of the idea of the rabbi. The rabbi. And you have your definition there, a person who has received formal training in Jewish law and is qualified to interpret it and apply it. Rab in Hebrew means great, and so Rabbi means my great one, is what rabbi means. And so the rabbis become the interpreters of Jewish law and the bearers of tradition and conduct. With the emergence of the rabbi, in this period, you have a distinction that arises within Judaism, where before you have Judaism per se as an entity, but now you have a more specific form of Judaism, what scholars call rabbinical Judaism. So it's an innovation in the development of Judaism. The Judaism of the rabbis and their interpretations. La da 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 la da dee. The Jewish hope for freedom does not go away, and there is another revolt. There's a second revolt in the 2nd century. By a man named Simeon Bar Kokhba. And this revolt is named after him. It's called the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, or the Bar Kokhba Revolt, which happens in 132 AD and ends in 135 AD. What happens? Jerusalem has been destroyed since 70, and the Romans decide to establish a colony of Romans, non-Jews, in Jerusalem, and they plan to build a temple to Jupiter on the site of the former Jerusalem temple. Well, as you can imagine, defeated or not, that's going to make the Jews go bananas. As it should, It's a complete insult to their God. They're going to build this pagan temple on top of their Jewish temple. And so there is one thing leads to another, and there is the Bar Kokhba revolt. This man, Simeon Bar Kokhba, also known as Simon Bar Kokhba, decides to revolt, get some Jews together into armies, and they go after the Romans. And actually, they're quite successful. Whether they surprised the Romans or whatever, but they were quite successful. They defeated Roman armies and were able to establish a more or less independent state in and around Jerusalem for like 2.5 years. And one of the signs, for example, in the ancient world that you have an independent state is that you produce money. You mint your own coins. That's a good indicator that a people are independent if they have that ability. And so we have evidence here. These are coins printed during the rule of Simeon Bar Kokhba. So here in ancient Hebrew script. Simeon, his name is Simeon Bar Kokhba. Simon, the son of Kokhba, seems to have been his historical name, but he was also called Simon Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba is an Aramaic, actually it's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic, which is a related language, which means son of the star, or son of a star. So he had a nickname. He's called Bar Kokhba, the son of the star. Why? Well, because one of the famed rabbis from the ancient time period that we're talking about, this man Akiba, described Simon Bar Kokhba as the Messiah because, he actually did what the Messiah was supposed to do. He was a Jew. I don't know if he was Davidically descended, but anyways, I have to look that up. But he kicked out the enemies of the Jews, established the kingdom, and everything seemed to be going along swimmingly. Okay, so this famous Rabbi Akiba said, I think he's the Messiah, and called him the son of the star because he felt like he fulfilled one of the prophecies of the Messiah. Where do you get this? From the book of Numbers in the Jewish scriptures. Anyone want to read that for us? Oh, Mr. Sullivan, go ahead. Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Sorry, Mr. Urban. Go ahead.
From I see him.
Start with this, Balaam.
Balaam said to Balak, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star blind.
Kokab?
Kokab shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab. Edom shall be disposed. There also his enemies shall be disposed. And one from Jacob.
Yeah, cool. I know, it looks like Klingon, right?
Yeah. Shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities.
Okay, so this is a famous passage from the book of Numbers, chapter 24 in the Bible, the Jewish sacred writings. And this man, Balak, is a local ruler. Think of Moab, actually. And he's asking this prophet, this holy man Balaam, to pronounce curses on the people of Israel. And in the story, as the story goes, God intervenes, and every time Balaam tries to pronounce a curse on the Israelites, he actually pronounces a blessing instead. And Balak keeps getting angrier and angrier as the non-cursing goes along. But in one of these blessings by Balaam, this prophet, he says, I see him, but he's coming in the future. I behold him, okay? He's a star, or he's compared to like a star that will appear, a kochab, or kochba, okay? That will come out of Jacob and rise out of Israel. And he'll be some kind of ruler who will defeat the enemy. So this was interpreted by some Jews as a prediction of the Messiah, okay? And you know, you see this also like in the story of Jesus of Nazareth, whom some people believe, some Jews thought was the Messiah. You know, the Star of Bethlehem, right? Jesus is born in this town of Bethlehem, and a star appears in the sky, okay? Same kind of idea. This has been fulfilled, and so he is the son of the star that will rise out of Jacob to save us. Well, that's not quite what happens. They do have a little success under Bar Kokhba or Simeon Bar Kosiba, but the Romans come back with their army, and they kill Bar Kosiba. They raze the city of Jerusalem. They completely destroy it. Not only do they destroy it, but they rename it. And they rename the region. They rename Jerusalem. They take away its name. They call it Aelia Capitolina. Okay, after the Roman emperor, it's named after the family of the Roman emperor, and over a temple to Zeus, the god Jupiter. Again, with the god Jupiter. And they don't call it Judea anymore. Judea, the land of the Jews. They take that away. And they rename it Syria Palestina, Syria. So they completely erase even the memory that the Jews lived there. That's how angry the Romans were by their revolt. The Romans had never done this to any other group, even groups that had revolted against them. You know, once they had subdued the revolt, they never renamed their area to erase their memory, but only to the Jews. Furthermore, Jews were forbidden from ever living in the city of Jerusalem ever again. They were kicked out. They were only allowed to enter on one day of the year in which to mourn the loss of the temple, and that was it. So even then, you might think, well, that's a nice concession. They're at least allowed in one day of the year to visit their destroyed temple, but that's it. So they could visit again their destroyed temple and remember who did it to them. The restriction against Jews not living in Jerusalem was not removed until Islam came into the picture, and Muslims conquered Jerusalem around the 7th century AD, the 600s. So, you have, what's this period, like 500 years where Jews were not living in Jerusalem, not allowed. What happens in the interim during this period, the Classic Age and the Middle Ages? Well, some important dates to note. You have in 313 AD, the emperor of the Romans, whom I've just been talking about, actually becomes a follower of a Jew. He converts to worshiping Jesus of Nazareth, a Jew. With Christianity, he becomes a Christian. Which would be great for the Jews, right? He's following the Jews. He's reading their sacred writings. He believes in Jewish things like the Messiah. That should make the life of Jews a little bit better. No, it doesn't. In fact, if anything, it makes the life of Jews worse because they killed Christ, according to the Christians. In the 7th century, 630 to 750 AD, Islam arrives in the region, sweeps up the north and conquers Palestine and all the way to Babylon and stuff like that. Islam is also connected to Judaism, as we'll learn when we study Islam. Islam claims a lineage to Father Abraham, one of his sons. And they revere the Jews. They revere Moses and David. They consider them great prophets. Even Jesus is considered a great prophet. So that should make things better for the Jews. Somewhat. It depends. Better than under the Christians. Let's put it that way. The Jews fared better under the Muslims when Islam arrived than they fared under the Christians. During this period, we also have what is called the Age of the Academics, which flourished. This age flourished from around the 7th century until the 11th century AD. And again, this was under Muslim rule. So yeah, the Jews did fare somewhat better under the Muslims. You had a flourishing of intellectual thought because there were two centers of learning at this time, both centered in Iraq, ancient Babylon, modern-day Iraq. And the academics collected Jewish legal opinions and interpretations into a larger work called the Talmud, which again we will certainly talk about later when we talk about the Mishnah. You've got this multi-volume collection of all these opinions of rabbis and conversations amongst rabbis about the law and the Mishnah and all this stuff, this good stuff called the Talmud. So this happens during this period. And this was also the time during the age of the academics when materials for synagogue worship were created and the synagogue service of worship was standardized. Okay, we can find the origins of the synagogue service here during this time period. Also, the Hebrew text of the Bible became more fixed. Before that, it was a little bit more fluid, because people were passing it on orally. It wasn't really written down necessarily. I'll give you this definition here of what an academic was. This is a title for these academics. They're called, a person who was one of these academics was a gaon, and the plural in Hebrew is geonim. Geonim. So sometimes you'll see this also called as the age of the geonim, who were these academics, these head of academies in medieval Iraq who were doing these things that I've described. There's a bust. I think we'll see him later with Christianity. This is a bust of the man Constantine, who became the emperor, who became a Christian in 313. His name is Constantine. And there's a picture of Islam arrives. Okay. In the 1500s, the 16th century, we arrive to what is called the modern period, and that extends until 1948. The main thing to note about the modern period is the Haskalah. During this period, starting really more in the 1600s, actually, you have what's called the Enlightenment, the Age of Light. Okay, so there's a period of enlightenment that develops in Western Europe. And what was the Enlightenment? It was an emphasis on the use of human reasoning alone for knowledge. So whereas before people had relied on religious reasoning or cultural reasoning and people like that, traditions that have been passed on by authorities, now you had people saying, well, wait a second, why don't we share what's really in common amongst us, which is our minds, our intellects, and use that to determine what is actually the truth. During this period, you also had new discoveries and exploration. Europeans discovered North America and South America, parts of Asia. I mean, they knew Asia was there, but they were sailing over to Asia and discovering that. And you also had the emergence and the triumph of modern science, the modern scientific method. These things affected Western Europe, but they also affected the Jews who were living there. And their experience of the Enlightenment is called the Haskalah. Should have looked up what the Hebrew word means, but I didn't look it up. If anyone wants to earn an extra credit point, you can look up on your phone what Haskalah means literally in Hebrew. I'd be appreciative. So the question starts to be asked amongst Jews, as it was asked amongst a lot of religious people, Christians as well in Western Europe, but specifically amongst Jews, they start to ask, what does it mean to be a Jew in the context of the Enlightenment? What is the point of continuing to adhere to beliefs and customs from a primitive, pre-modern group of tribes from the ancient Near East, from thousands of years ago? What's the point anymore? And there were several responses. And here's another development that comes from the Haskalah. You have the development of different denominations or different groupings of Jews within Judaism. Reform Jews, Orthodox Jews, and conservative Jews. And they're categorized by their response to the Haskalah, to this development. The Reform Jews accepted the Enlightenment totally and tried to apply it to the religion. The Orthodox Jews completely rejected it and wanted to continue on as before with no change. And then you had centrists like the conservatives who wanted to conserve what was the important, but to integrate insights from the Haskalah into the following of Judaism. Maybe there were some things that were important for Jews to do, like still circumcise male babies according to the law, but maybe there were things that could change. You know? So they were more middle of the road. Another major development during this time period in the 1800s is Zionism. Zionism. The word Zion, Zion in Hebrew is an ancient name for the city of Jerusalem. So it just means Jerusalem. But it comes to be attached to this movement to create a Jewish homeland where Jews could be respected, that could live and follow their religion, or just live, period, without being persecuted or battered about. And the idea of Zionism is first kind of promoted by this man, Theodor Herzl. You can see his dates there, 1860 to 1904, who founded the Jewish World Zionist Organization. So it's right there in the name, Zionism, to look for a homeland. He really thought that finding a homeland for Jews was the only solution to anti-Semitism, that having a national homeland was the only way to have true peace. And, in his idea, it didn't necessarily mean going back to Palestine. There were a number of proposals. I mean, where to go? Some people proposed Uganda in the central part of Africa. Yes, Uganda. Just go there. There's nobody living in Uganda. I don't know. Are there people living in Uganda? Yeah, I think so. So maybe we shouldn't go to Uganda. How about Argentina? Argentina is pretty desolate, especially the southern part. So there was the idea. Herzl favored Argentina as a place for Jews to go and establish a homeland. But later he realized that, Israel was still tugging at his Jewish heart. That was probably the true homeland and desire and that was the desire for many Jews. His intent, however, was not a religious one. It was nationalistic. It was establishing a nation. So he didn't have any religious intent. It had nothing to do with, well, that's the land God gave us, and so it's our promised land, so we need to go back there. No, it was more like we just need a nation. And I guess since this area of land is historically connected to us, we should go back. Because, of course, nobody but Jews is living there anymore, right? Holla? Huh? Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of people living there who were not Jews at the time and had been living there for a long, long time, too. So how do you solve that issue? Well, we'll find out. So Zionism develops. Obviously, he dies in 1904. So if you know about history, you know that the State of Israel wasn't founded until 1948. So he never sees it fulfilled in his lifetime, but he does want to see it fulfilled, and so he is, in a way, considered the founder of the modern Jewish state for promoting his ideas. Another event during the modern period, which really propels the idea of Zionism, is the Holocaust. I should mention the fact that Zionism was controversial even amongst Jews. Reform Jews that I mentioned before completely rejected the idea because it was connected with ideas of the Messiah and stuff like that. And ancient Israel. For Reform Jews, you were a member of the culture you were in. So you were German, you just happened to be Jewish, or you were American, you just happened to be Jewish. So Reform Jews originally were very much against Zionism. They've later changed their minds about that. And other Jews as well. There were Jews that had religious problems with the idea because the state of Israel could only really be refounded once the Messiah came. And the Messiah hadn't come yet. So they had theological, religious problems with the idea. So it wasn't like every Jew accepted this idea. It was controversial. But this event of the Holocaust kind of changes people's minds, especially Reform Jews. The Holocaust. We really need some place to go because this event that happens from 1939 to 1945, the Second World War, and actually it starts even before 1939 in the early 1930s, was a direct persecution and tried to annihilate the people of Israel from Europe. The Holocaust is called the calamity, the Shoah in Hebrew, which means calamity. It's also called the Khurban in Hebrew sometimes, which means destruction. Oh, put that on there. Khurban, destruction. But more commonly is called the calamity, Shoah. And to make a long story short, because this is not a history in the Western Europe or history of the world or anything like that, but to make a long story short, you have this dude named Adolf Hitler. You see his dates there, who was an Austrian German. He wasn't from Germany by nationality. He was from Austria. He joins a group that would later be called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. It's a long name, so let me give it the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So they were socialists in their political philosophy. Believe like the government should run. Well, I shouldn't say that's more totalitarianism, but the government should be involved in running the state, and the state is more of a social entity which includes everybody. So you kind of are subordinated to the state in your rights and stuff like that. For shorthand, this group was called the Nazis, the National Socialists. I'm trying to remember my German. I didn't write it down here. The Nationale Sozialistische. So it becomes Nazis, the National Socialists. In 1925, Hitler publishes the first volume of a work he calls Mein Kampf, my struggle, what he sees as his struggle for the German people. And he argues for revitalizing German society based on race. And since Jews aren't technically Germans, they're ethnically Jews in his mind, the Jews must go, amongst other groups like the Gypsies and groups like that, but especially the Jews. In 1934, he becomes leader. That's all Führer means in German, one who leads. He becomes the leader of Germany, and with his accession to power, Jew-targeted persecution begins. Now, in the beginning, it's persecution, and the solution of what to do about the Jews in Germany and their sphere of influence, as they call it, surrounding countries that they would later invade. And so, what to do? They wanted to move them out. That's kind of like the original idea. Get rid of them, put them in camps, and then move. That's what they said they were going to do. Move them to other places. Just get them out of Europe. But the final, they come up with this ominous-sounding final solution to the Jewish question, which is that all Jews in German-occupied territory and any other territory they conquered must be exterminated. And so 5 to 6 million Jews in Europe are killed. Or they just disappear. I don't know. Because you can go on the internet and find conspiracy theorists who say, no, the Jews never were killed, or not as many Jews were killed. The problem with that is that we have 5 to 6 million Jews who were there one day and then weren't there. And their families don't know where they went. Well, their families know where they went. They went to the camps and never came back. But, of course, we also have pictures. We have pictures of the dead bodies that were at the ovens and burned up in the oven. So we have pictures of the people there. We also have the eyewitness testimony of the people who were in the camps, who saw what was going on. So that's probably, anyways. But, 5 to 6 million Jews. I didn't put this on my notes, but we should also remember that there were about 6 million others that the Germans exterminated as well, coming to like a total of 12 million people the Nazis exterminated. And this include, I mentioned gypsies, homosexuals, the disabled, political prisoners. They were killing everyone who was opposed. But they were especially focused on the Jews. And you can see that, you can see this in the writings. Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf, Volume 1. The Jew is and remains a parasite, a sponger who, like a pernicious bacillus, spreads over wider and wider areas. The effect produced by his presence is like that of a vampire. He sucks the blood out of you until you're dead. For wherever he establishes himself, the people who grant him hospitality are bound to be bled to death. So it's not looking good for the Jews. They don't have it. What's he going to do about it? Well, they gave that job to this guy, Reinhard Heydrich. he was the one who was given the job of, how are we going to solve the Jewish question? He came up with, we'll set up different camps and put the Jews in the camps and we'll eventually just kill them all because we'll have them all there, You don't have to. So he wrote a letter, or this was a letter of Hermann Göring, one of the Jewish part of the Nazi leadership close to Hitler. He was writing a letter about just telling him what's going on. I mean, the Nazis kept a lot of records. They kept a lot of documentation about what was going on, complementing the task that was assigned to you, which dealt with arriving at a solution of the Jewish problem, or the Jewish question. As advantageously as possible, I hereby charge you with making all necessary preparations in regard to organizational, financial matters for bringing about a complete solution of the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence in Europe. So wherever we are, set up camps, round up the Jews, send them there, and do what you're going to do to them, which usually ended up like this: bodies. Okay. The next development, as I said, this really gave impetus to Zionism amongst Jews. We need a place where we can go where we'll be protected and we can live our lives without persecution. And so they start very quickly pushing proposals for going back specifically to Palestine, which at that time was under the control of the British mandate. They had the United Nations had given control of that area to the United Kingdom. I mean, this is an extremely complicated and debated period. Obviously, if you watch the news, because you have the war in Gaza between this Arab group Hamas, which comes later, and between the Israeli government. And it's not the first time there have been little minor wars in Israel between Palestinian Arab groups and the Jews and the Israelis. So the territory was under UN control, which was given to the British, and the British seemed to give conflicting assurances to the Arabs and the Jews. To the Arab leaders, the British said Palestine would be part of an independent Arab-controlled homeland. So that's what they're telling the Arabs. To the Jews, they're saying there will be a Jewish state in Palestine with mutual respect for rights of non-Jewish groups. That's what they're telling to the Jews. So are they talking out of both sides of their mouth? I don't know, but it's confusing. What was actually supposed to happen? You do have, this is just part of the history, which, what are you going to do with it? During this time of the British Mandate, you do have acts of terrorism by Jewish groups. You have groups like Haganah, it's called the Defense in Hebrew. Irgun, another group who were like blowing up buildings, blowing up train lines, all sorts of stuff because they wanted to force the British out so they could take over control and establish a Jewish state. And they were doing this against the British and the local Arabs. So in the late 1940s, the British, their mandate was going to be over, and they were going to leave, and supposedly there was supposed to be kind of like they're going to carve up Palestine into Jewish regions and Arab regions, and peace would blossom, apparently, whatever. I don't know I guess that's what they thought was going to happen, but that doesn't happen. In 1948, the Israelis simply declare independence, complete independence. There's no separation between Arab or Jew. They take everything, the whole land of Israel is theirs. They declare it independent in 1948. And this happens the day before the British were supposed to hand over Palestine. And with that announcement, it starts a war where the surrounding Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, declare war on the new independent state, which Israel happens to win, surprisingly. Not bad for just declaring your independence, having declared your independence. And so they're able to establish an independent state of Israel. And so they start making laws, and one of those laws is 1950, the Law of Return. The Law of Return. Why is this important? Because it makes the statement that all Jews around the world have the right to emigrate to Israel. They are allowed to make pilgrimage, aliyah, as it's called in Hebrew, to Israel. So they call this aliyah. A Jew makes aliyah. That any Jew at any time can declare yourself a Jew and you declare that you want to return to Israel, and you have a right to to come back and be a citizen. That applies to Jews. It doesn't apply to the people that were there before. And and it's tough. And it's a very, I can't go deep into the whole issue because, whatever. But the history is like, it's a bloody history. I mean, if you look at it from a Jewish perspective, you have the constant persecution through centuries, but you also have the wars that they had to fight to stay alive with their new state. If you look at it from a Palestinian perspective, you have people who've been living there for centuries, even millennia, are being kicked out of their homes. They're being told, because they were told to leave. They were told they couldn't stay there. And in fact, they've been digging up evidence. This is reported in the Jewish newspaper I was reading about, that the Israeli army would go through Arab towns, and they would get everyone in the town square, and they would go from home to home and set bombs and blow up their homes. And the purpose of this was so that they had no place to come back to. And that's why you have the modern situation of all these people who are Palestinian Arabs into these little enclaves in the north and the south and stuff, because they had no place to go to. So they all kind of grouped together in these various regions, and it's been that way since, and there doesn't seem to be any solution in sight. So there's a lot of animosity over this issue. And that's all I'm going to say about that. The law of return. Okay. I told you that the idea was problematic, or the idea of Zionism was, was controversial. And you see this. These are Jews that for religious reasons reject Zionism. They're Orthodox Jews. And in fact, they're on the side of the Palestinian Arabs, ironically enough. It's weird. I mean, you just have to go with these things. You can't see Judaism as a monolith. There are different opinions, even about something as essential as the state of Israel. Okay? All right, let's get into Jewish beliefs. We'll start with what is called the Torah. The Torah. The word Torah in Hebrew means instruction. Oftentimes you'll see this word Torah translated as the law, but it really doesn't mean law. And it does that in your textbook. It says that it means law. But it really means, the Hebrew word means instruction, literally, a teaching. So what is the Torah? The Torah is the name given for, generalized name, for all the teachings of the Jewish religion, both those that are written down and those that are remembered and handed on. See, we see the same, like Shruti and Smriti in Hinduism, except they're unified. They're not separate as they are in Hinduism. They're unified under this term Torah. The first form of Torah in Hebrew is called Torah, that is Torah shebichtav. Torah shebichtav. Instruction that is written down, that's from a writing. The second form of Torah is called Torah she'ba'al peh. Torah which comes out of the mouth. Oral teaching. That which is spoken. The Torah shebichtav is most properly found in what's called the Tanakh. Christians would say the Bible, but Jews don't call it the Bible. They call it Tanakh and other names, but Tanakh is the most common one. And the She'ba'al Peh Torah comes in the Talmud, the form of the Talmud that I've mentioned before. And we'll talk about these in turn. First, the Tanakh, the written Torah. The Tanakh is the Jews' name for their sacred writings. That's what they call them, the Tanakh. And the word is really an acronym. Does anyone know what an acronym is? Not an acronym, Mr. Citrigno. What is an acronym, Mr. Citrigno? Huh? The same meaning? Possibly, sir. Maybe.
Isn't it more than one word combined into?
Miss Panic? I thought it was the voice of God.
But when there's more than one word combined into mean.
Okay, I think we're getting warmer, Miss Panic. I think we're getting warmer. Okay, where do you want to see this goals?
So letters that combine with something else.
Okay, give me an example. No, it's okay. What? STEM, okay, yeah, STEM, science, or NASA, National Aeronautics Space Association, FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, BFF, or BTE, best teacher ever. Right, Ms. Reeser?
Did you post this one?
I did not. Oh, thank you, Ms. Undercup.
You posted the this.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And yeah,
You're changing the quiz? Okay, well, I'll have to get on that then. I'll have to make a correction. My bad.
it's okay.
Yeah, no,
That's
it's
what I
not
was
okay.
talking about.
Okay, no, but thank you for telling me that, because I thought I had, and I completely forgot about it.
Yeah.
It's undercover. Mentioned it before. Okay, so that's good. Yes, Mr. Dunn will have to do that. Okay, so an acronym. An acronym. And that's what Tanakh is. It's not actually a word, it's an acronym for the three portions or parts of the sacred writings. You have T for Torah, N for Nevi'im, and you have K for Ketuvim. And then how Jews would make an acronym is they put the sound ah, but A in between them. So this is how you get Tanakh, Ta-Nakh. And you'll see that this happens a lot in Judaism. They like acronyms, they like nicknames, all sorts of stuff. They can make it, very, I don't sound negative, but this is an outsider, can make it frustrating to know what they're talking about half the time. But so that's what's going on here. The Tanakh. It is the combination of the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim writings. Which are what? Well, the first one is the written Torah. The Torah Shebechtiv, the writing. Excuse me. And then the second one is the Nevi'im, the prophets, which means prophets. And then the Ketuvim are simply the writings, the third part. And I'll talk about these in turn. Let's start with the written Torah, the first part. I wonder if I could do that. Well, there's a definition for it. The written Torah is the revelation given by God to Moses that's written down in the first 5 books of the Tanakh. Okay, so you have the opening 5 books of the Jewish sacred writings. And I give you the list right there. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the written Torah. And traditionally, this was revealed to Moses in its entirety. And it's the source of the oral tradition as well. Okay, the oral traditions that are based on these sacred writings. But even though, the traditional view is that it was all given to Moses at once, everything in these 5 books, that's probably not how it developed historically. Rather, the scholars think that the written Torah developed over centuries, beginning with the United Kingdom in the 900s and ending with Ezra and Nehemiah, so sometime between the 900s to the 400s BC. To the 400s BC. Another word for Whoops. Okay. I'll stop here because I'm looking at time. It's 1:45. So I'll stop here and I'll continue on Thursday. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Oh, Professor, I
Yes, sir.
found the definition of Haskalah
Yes.
in Hebrew. According to Oxford Reference, the term Haskalah in medieval Jewish literature is from the Hebrew word sekel, which means the intellect.
Oh, okay, good.
But as here applied, refers to the attitude of attraction to general knowledge, secular learning, and recognition.
Excellent, sir. So intellect. Good, sir. I'll write down that you get one extra point. Extra credit. You're welcome, sir. I'll make another one here. Thank you. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Technically, well. Have a good day, sir. You have a good
Have a good one. I added to it. I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah. If
Okay.
anything, I'll email you it.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you, miss.
Have a good day.
You too. Well, I say that, but you can't do that. You can't say, well, I make them at my discretion. You have to have them. But if I make a big point about, hey, print them out, you can use them to write notes on them. And then say, well, you don't really need them. You shouldn't have your notes. Yeah, it's not good. Okay. Alrighty.